Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 65, The Christian Nerd with Scott Higa.
And as the title suggests, we are talking to our special guest today, Scott Higa, who is the host of the Christian Nerd podcast. He's somebody who's been around for a long time. We're going to talk to him about Star Trek and his faith, and I hope you enjoy it. Well, Mike, we are not alone this week.
Indeed.
You ever feel like there's someone watching you?
I feel like there's a nerd watching.
Maybe a Christian nerd?
Perhaps. I think, yes, very much a Christian nerd.
Not Rockwell. I always feel like somebody's watching me. Not. Well, I am a Christian nerd. I am also a massive fan of 80s music. So any opportunity to reference anything from the 80s, I'll be all over it.
I like it.
Now I've just ruined the intro. Gosh dang it.
That's sorry. All right. Everybody welcome Scott Higa.
Hi, Scott.
Hello, gentlemen. Thank you so much for having this. Is a treat. I'm very honored. I'm very, very excited to be here joining you on the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast, because it is one of my favorite podcasts, and I listen to it regularly.
Wow, thank you. That's so cool. I listen to the part, so I don't listen to, so I'm not caught up in Discovery, as we were talking about before we started recording. Right. So I don't listen. So I listen to the second episode, not the first, because I don't want any spoilers. Cool, good.
But
good.
once I watch those episodes, then I'll catch up and know everything you guys.
They'll still be there. Yeah.
All the wonderfully intelligent, insightful things that you were saying that make me think, man, I did not see that. I just like the flashing lights. But no, I'm really, really, really grateful to be joining you, Kevin, and you, Mike. Just very, very excited to be here and talk about Star Trek, because Star Trek is the best.
Star Trek is awesome. Would you please, since you've already been revealed to the listeners here, would you tell everybody who they're listening to? Introduce yourself.
Well, my name, as they said, is Scott Higa. I call myself the Christian Nerd. I only get to use the definite article because I got the domain before anybody else. So that is the funny story. Someone a couple years into the Christian Nerd emailed me and said, "Hey, I'd like to start a website called Christian Nerd. Is that okay?" And I was very appreciative that he asked me, and I said no, and then immediately bought the domain so nobody else could take it. If you know me at all in the internet, I'm not even remotely famous, but I do the Christian Nerd. Now it's a podcast committed to looking at the intersection between Christian faith and nerd culture. I started it in 2011. It was a blog for the first 5.5 years of its existence. And as I was reflecting on coming on the show, I realized that Kevin and Mike, you were two of my oldest internet friends. Like, you were faithfully commenting a decade ago on posts that I was writing. And so to see it all come full circle and hear your guys' show and be able to, I'm just like, really, Mike, I've known these guys for a decade. Back with the Undiscovered Country Project. Yep. And Kevin, you invited me to write for Spocktober. I'm literally a published author because I am in Spockology. So, so many it's exciting and it's fun. So in 2015, I started the Christian Nerd podcast with, I had a co-host, Ron. And then about 2017, it switched over to just me. It is a bi-weekly show, which could mean it's every other week or twice a week. In this instance, it's twice a week. And I just kind of talk about my life and what's it like to be a pastor and a father and a nerd. And it all just sort of gets jumbled together in my podcast. It's not as clean and laid out as your guys' show is. You guys have like themes and topics. In general, I just get on there and start talking about whatever I'm thinking about, and generally divulge too much about my personal life for all the internet to hear.
Which is a perfectly legitimate podcast format, I have to say.
People like choose a path, right? They're like, we're just going to be buttoned up. We're going to talk about the thing. Or I'm going to come on and be like, well, I haven't had a quiet time for 13 days and I'm a horrible follower of Jesus, but he still loves me and I'm trying my best, you guys. That's kind of, that's the lane that I ended up in somehow.
Well, that's you gotta find your place. You gotta find where you exist. I tell you, it's really funny listening to your story of the Christian Nerd, because it's
it's like hearing somebody like repeat my story back to me, because I launched this, which used to be the Undiscovered Country Project, also in 2011.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
That was my first year with the Undiscovered Country Project. I think I'd started my website before then, and I had a blog on it, but then I really launched the Undiscovered Country Project in 2011. And that was back when Tim was originally going to start watching Star Trek with me to help me start writing Star Trek devotionals. That was, then he had the idea to make audio commentaries, which we recorded far more than we released because we lost some episodes and could never fill in the gaps. And I'm kind of glad that some of those episodes weren't released, because I'm a little embarrassed listening back to them.
Yeah.
I keep thinking I'm going to release them, but I never have. But we had them online for a little while, a few of them, and but then that really spawned the idea for the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast, and he was my co-host for a long time, my primary co-host. He's still in the mix, but it's mostly Mike and David now. And
when did it make the switch from the Undiscovered Country Project to the Gospel According to Star Trek? Was that when you were coming up with titles for your first iteration of the book? Is that when it switched to the Gospel According to Star Trek?
Well, it stayed the Undiscovered Country Project while I was promoting the first book.
Okay.
I had originally, I was going to title the book The Undiscovered Country, because that was the title of the paper that became a chapter in a book, Light Shining in a Dark Place, that was edited by my buddy Jeff Sellers. And I didn't know, I was doing title research on competing titles for my proposal. And I was like, why don't I know who wrote the Gospel According to Star Trek? That's so silly. Like, I should know that, of all things. So I started looking it up and I couldn't find it. And then suddenly I realized it was because it didn't exist. And then all of a sudden I decided that it didn't exist because I hadn't written it yet.
Amazing.
And like, okay, I'm going to be that guy. And so one book has turned into what is now planned for at least 5, to do a book for each series. And I kept the name Undiscovered Country Project for a long time because people have been with it for a long time and they've been following me. And around the time we started launching the podcast, I was like, I'm going to rebrand.
I noticed the shift. The rebrand.
Yeah, I said, I'm going to rebrand everything to Gospel According to Star Trek, and we're just going to go with it. And I've been really happy with that since then.
Yeah, no, I think it's been great. It really, because I think it brought, I was following you, the Undiscovered Country Project on Facebook and everything. And then when I'm like, Undiscovered Country Project has changed its name to the Gospel According to Star Trek. Oh, there's a podcast. Oh, I can listen to that. So it's been, like I said, I think I've listened to every episode. I love it. I love
that's great.
Hearing you guys talk about Star Trek, because like that's the problem, right? Because we live in this nerdy world, and I think kind of when I launched the Christian Nerd in 2011, like nerd culture was kind of on the rise, like with the MCU and Star Wars returning and Harry Potter and gaming and all the things that we got made fun of when we were younger are now popular, which is. Like, I'm excited, but also kind of angry that I didn't get that opportunity to be cool when I was wearing a Return of the Jedi shirt to school in the 6th grade. But I think, right, so with all the rise of all the nerd stuff, it's been great for my podcast, my website. There's a bunch of other kind of nerdy Christian stuff out there. But Star Trek, it's growing in popularity, but like not to the level of everything else. So that's why I love your podcast, because you are my Star Trek friends. Like, you're the only friends I have that watch Star Trek. So every time I want to talk about Star Trek, I'm like, well, I better sit down with Mike and Kevin and have a conversation where I just listen to them talk. And it's okay. I'll just sit quietly in the corner because it feeds my nerdy Star Trek soul.
Well, I'm glad for that. And I'm glad you're listening, and you've been supporting us for a while, and we really appreciate that. And yeah, and I thought it was really cool when you started doing the Christian Nerd podcast. It's like, hey, that's cool. I can like hear his voice and stuff. And yeah, it's very cool.
I apologize. Every time I go on another show, I realize that I have a voice for like singing the background of a choir. Like I have friends, like they have these great, like, Kevin, you got this great like radio voice. And I'm like, I'm just a nasally droning, like, look at me, or not even listen to me. It's like, people do, I guess. But I try.
Yeah. Well, you're very engaged. I mean, your podcast is very engaging, and you call it everything jumbled all together. But that's part of its appeal, because you bring it all to the table, and you don't leave any energy and excitement out, or whatever emotion you're feeling that day. We know it, and it makes you relatable. And I think you mentioned kind of jokingly, "Oh, I'm a bad pastor. I'm a bad follower of Jesus." But it's important for people to hear pastors, especially, talk about those struggles and talk about those feelings, and as you said, reaffirm the grace.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that, I mean, you were in vocational ministry, Mike, so
I was.
Like there's when I was in seminary, I was in my preaching classes and I was doing my practice sermons for grades, and I got knocked. They're like you share too much about yourself. You share too many personal stories. I'm like, okay, well, thank you, preaching professor. So I get into an actual local congregation, and I was a youth pastor, and our senior pastor invited me to preach. And after the first couple times I was preaching, he said, you need to share more personal stories. And in a classroom setting, it makes sense, right? You're going for a grade, but as we all know, having been part of congregations, like there's a relationship between a pastor and a congregation. Yeah. And so if I want our congregation to understand me, to know me, to listen to anything that I have to say, then I have to be open. I have to be honest. I have to be personal. Yeah. They have to know the things with which I struggle. Not all the deepest and darkest things. I save those for my podcast. But just, right? We need to appear to be human.
I mean, it can be done to a fault, but it does have to be. You do have to bring yourself into the pulpit and into ministry, professional ministry. So, absolutely. So I commend you for sharing as much as you do with us.
Yeah, I do too, and I think that's really great. And that's the interesting thing. Like, we talk a lot on the show about church structures and ministry and different ways that it happens, and different failings that it has, and different good things that it has. But one of the things that I know from my time in seminary and from knowing pastors and all of that is just the difference. In fact, I was talking with a pastor friend of mine the other day, and she said something about, there wasn't a class, in seminary about yada yada thing that her church was dealing with. And I said, yeah, but there wasn't a class in seminary for most of the things that you end up really needing to know as a pastor, are there? And she was like, yeah, that's true.
The class that I liked the least in seminary was a pastoral counseling class. It was all about our genograms and families of origin. I thought, this is the biggest waste of time. It's literally the only class, not the only class, but the class I've used the most in actual ministry. Because you realize, I'm in a congregation full of broken people who are hurting. Why are they hurting? Because their families of origins are jacked up. Like that, it's so, I hate how it all comes back to that. But, in all my experience, it's like, man, I'm so grateful for that class that I had now.
Yeah. That's so, that's so important. Talk to us a little bit about your pastorate, like, how you got into ministry and what kind of work you do.
Yeah, so I'll duck and dodge the stones. I'm literally an ordained Baptist minister, but not any kind of the bad Baptists that hate people. So our church, we were a community Baptist church, but we recently changed our name because we took out the Baptist. We're just now Community Church Rancho because Baptist either turn people off because they assumed we hated everybody, or people showed up expecting us to hate everybody, and when we didn't, they were really disappointed. So always some qualifiers when I share that I'm a Baptist minister. So I've grown up in a family of people in ministry. My grandparents were missionaries in South America and Mexico for many years. My uncle's a pastor, and my grandpa, he literally turned 101 years old today, the day we're recording.
Oh, wow. Happy birthday to him.
Still alive, totally lucid, just an amazing man of God. And he and my grandma, who passed away 15 years ago now, they have, I think, 10 grandchildren, and they prayed specifically for me to go to seminary and go into ministry. I don't know why, but they did. And so I fought it for a little while. I wanted to be an actor and, earn all the praise on stage that I could. But then I was on a mission trip in Mexico as a junior in high school and did not audibly hear God call me to ministry, but it might as well have been. And, people share those experiences like, oh, that must've been great. It's like, no, I was devastated. Because I realized that my life of fame and fortune was gone because God was calling me to ministry. And I did not want to go into ministry. I'd seen what ministry does to people. So that kind of set me on that path. Went to college, went to seminary, did a bunch of youth ministry. I've been at the same church since I graduated from seminary in 2007 in various roles. I was a youth pastor, then I was a communications pastor, oversaw some worship for a while, and currently I'm our family pastor. So I oversee basically cradle through high school. And that's kind of my oversight. Okay. So yeah, a lot of just, like hands-on real life, hanging out with students, preaching, talking to families, doing Bible classes, just, all those things. finding volunteers, training volunteers, just all the things that you think ministry is like. I'm doing all those Monday through or Sunday through Friday.
That's great.
Sunday through Thursday. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, how did you get to this point? Because, I mean, you and I have had this sort of similar arc of starting things, that are focused on this intersection between our faith life and our nerd life. Where did that come from for you? What was the spark of that? How did you get there?
Well, I mean, it can go all the way back to I think my earliest memory is my cousins took me to see Return of the Jedi when I was 3 or 4 years old. And so I worry that I've created this memory because it has so much value to me. So I'm like, because I wasn't living in California when Return of the Jedi came out, and I was only 2 when it came out, or 1.5, but they re-released it about 1.5 years later. So I would have been 3 or 4 years old, and I would have been in California at that point. So my cousins could have taken me. And I asked my cousins last year, my grandpa's 100th birthday, and they didn't remember, but my sister says she remembers. So I'll say my earliest memory is seeing Return of the Jedi. And then, I think that just set it off, right? Just all the nerd stuff. I grew up in a Christian home, so I've been a follower of Jesus. I mean, as much as anyone can be when they're born in a Christian home, as long as I can remember. And I've also basically been a nerd as long as I can remember. And so those journeys are just intertwined. And I've never really had a season of apostasy from my faith. I've never really wandered, but I did wander from my nerdiness for a season because it became in the 6th grade. I got made fun of a lot for being a nerd, for liking X-Men, for watching Star Trek, wearing Return of the Jedi shirts to school. And so it's really crazy, right? That I was an 11-year-old kid at the end of my 6th grade year, and I realized all these things that I love so much are causing me so much pain. So I'm going to pretend I don't like them so I can not get made fun of. And then that set me off for probably about 10 years of my life trying to be somebody I wasn't, which was pretty tragic. So I missed out on a lot of Voyager and Deep Space Nine in that season. And there wasn't really any Star Wars out, so it didn't matter that much. But yeah, it was so it was kind of a tough thing to be like, oh yeah, I like all these things, but I got to pretend not to, just because I didn't want to be, as a wounded little 11-year-old who didn't know what to do with his emotions. So pretending to be something I wasn't seemed like the healthiest response. And after a bunch of therapy, realizing that probably wasn't the best decision to make.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because, I too had a period of stepping away, from Star Trek a little bit, just because I was getting really busy in high school and I couldn't keep up with the series on the television, and I was really sticky about watching every episode.
There wasn't streaming back then.
Yeah, right. It was hard to catch up.
I remember trying to our local channel would show reruns of Deep Space Nine at 2:00 in the morning, and so I remember trying to set our VCR with an actual tape to record. I think I managed to get one. It was Terok Nor. That's the one episode I managed to record and watch on a VHS. It was mostly because I couldn't figure out how to do the timer on a VCR.
Those the
90s were insane, right?
Yes, right. Well,
sorry, Kevin, I cut you off.
No, you're fine. No, it's yes, and that's exactly the kind of thing where you just didn't. If you couldn't record it or it wasn't coming on, or whatever, you couldn't catch up. And I was so busy with high school and stuff, and I wasn't sure I was interested in these new series, and I just dropped out for a while. And I don't know what your experience was. For me, coming back to Star Trek, I had sort of undergone a worldview conversion where everything was connected to my Christian worldview. And so I saw Star Trek in a whole new way.
Yeah.
What was it like for you? Were you obviously came back from, denying your nerddom. How did that happen for you? And
well, when I heard the cock crow the third time, I knew I was really in trouble after my nerddom. So I think it was kind of a whole, so that season of denying my nerddom was really denying myself. I was pretending to be an extrovert because I thought that's what people would want, because the people who were extroverts didn't get made fun of.
Right.
So really for about 10 or 11 years, I was pretending to be this person. I was just dying on the inside. And then it really got to a point where I thought, I can't do this anymore. I have to be more authentic to myself. It was right around when Enterprise premiered. And I wasn't doing youth ministry at that time. So I was at home on a Tuesday night. So I started watching Enterprise, and then I was like, maybe this isn't that great. But what I did do, so again, all of us were of a certain age. So I illegally downloaded Star Trek Deep Space Nine via torrents and put it on my Sony PlayStation Portable and
Nice.
would watch Deep Space Nine while walking on the treadmill. So it's like the world's worst version of Peloton, but that's how I watched Deep Space Nine on a PlayStation Portable with illegal files that I downloaded from the internet. I'm sorry, Ira Stephen Bear. I paid to watch your documentary. Please don't come after me. And so that probably really started it up again. And then just realizing that, and then I met my wife in 2007, and she wasn't my wife then. She was a volunteer actually in our youth staff. Don't date volunteers. It usually goes poorly. Our story is the one in a million. So it all just kind of, kind of about 2007, I started coming into myself. Like I had my career, I'd finished seminary. I was just starting to really embrace who I was. And then like Iron Man came out in 2008, Star Trek came out in 2009. And so after that, there was just all this nerd stuff that like my soul had been longing for 15 years. And now it was finding its realization in popular media. And then I think that desire, that drive to talk, like, really when I started, I had a blog before The Christian Nerd, and it was like, like Music Monday, Leadership Tuesday, just a bunch of like dumb topics. They weren't dumb, but they weren't like driving me. And so I thought, what is something that I will be committed to writing about every single day, Monday through Friday, without fail? And I'm like, I can talk about Jesus that much. I can write about Jesus that much, and I can write about nerdy stuff that much. So that was really it, that I wanted. Nice. I didn't want to just start a blog and then fail. I wanted to write a post Monday through Friday every single day. And I can, proudly say that for probably about 5 or 6 years, I posted every single day, Monday through Friday without fail.
That's great. I mean, I have the passion, like you do, but at the same time, it's like the cranking out of words that regularly I could never do. I was a terrible blogger.
But you're a fabulous podcaster, and I love it.
Thank you very much. I'm actually happy with a lot of the writing I did on the blog. Yeah. But it was too long for blogs, and it was too, it actually, some of it ended up in my book. But it's great that you had that discipline. That was something I've always admired about you, that you had that discipline to go and do that every day. So for you, the concept of putting these two things together was just natural? Was that just how you were already thinking about things?
So for me, I think it's always been interconnected, just because, as I've shared on my podcast, it's just like it's all my life, right? That my faith, my family, my fandom, it's all like, there's no, it's not parceled off, right? Like it's just all who I am. So when I'm preaching at church, I'm making references to Star Trek. When I'm teaching our youth, I'm talking about Star Wars or Marvel all the time. Like it's just part of my life. It's who I am. So to sit down and write about something, talk about something, like I can't talk about who I am without talking about Jesus. I can't talk about who I am without talking about Star Wars, because it's just all, like I'm not trying, like I'm, for better or worse, I'm a very integrated person, and that all of these things are just part of who I am. And I think kind of that season of denying that part of me for a long time, growing in comfort, understanding that God loves me just as I am, that God can use my passion for nerdy stuff to help share his love and share his story. I think, because that's always been the driving factor for the Christian Nerd, is that I want people to see that God is already speaking to them in the stories that they love. Yeah. That God is speaking to us through Star Trek, as you've shown in numerous ways. He's speaking to us through Harry Potter. He's speaking to us through Marvel. Like, we just have to have eyes to see and ears to hear it. So that's what I'm trying to help people see, that, that series that you binge watch, let's talk about how God's present in that, how he's revealing some amount of himself, because, we all know there's one great narrative in the universe, and that's why all of our other narratives look like it. That's why our hearts swell when, I always talk about the moments, right, where I get goosebumps, right, when Gandalf comes riding up with the riders of Rohirrim at the end of Two Towers. Like, the music swells and our hearts swell because somebody's returning after 3 days to rescue somebody, right? Like, oh, why is that? Why? Like, I'm getting goosebumps right now talking about it. Why do those things move us? Well, because that's the story of God's redeeming work in all of us. So trying to help people see that through nerdclinations. It's a word I made up. Our nerdy inclinations, helping people see that in their favorite fandoms is just it's what drives me.
I think it's really interesting that you talk about the reason you do what you do, the way you do it, is because it's about being an integrated person. We talk a lot about that sort of thing on the show, you know, and about all of the different ways in which people may be asked to hide a part of themselves or change a part of themselves, you know, for the approval of other people, when really you are made as who you are on purpose. You know, you're not an accident, and you're not a mistake, and you are who you are in all the ways that you are for good reason, not just for a reason, but for good reason, because there is something that, and not just one thing, there are things that will come out of your life that can't come out of anybody else's.
Absolutely.
And that's part of the uniqueness of who you're made to be. And God is at work, as you say, you know, the reason God is at work in our nerddoms, or our nerdclinations, I like that. The reason God is at work in all those things and all those stories we tell is because God is at work in the whole human project, and the whole human story, all around us and in us and through us, even when we're trying for that not to be the case. And so I find that fascinating. Talk to me a little bit specifically about what draws you to Star Trek, and since we are a Star Trek show.
Oh, absolutely.
What draws you to Star Trek and how it informs your faith life?
So, you know, as I shared, I got made fun of a lot in junior high, and I started watching Star Trek probably, I think it might have been around the 5th season. So what was that? Like 1991, 1992. But our local,
and you're talking about Next Generation, right?
Yeah, Next Generation. Yeah, Next Generation is my Star Trek.
Right.
I love it. I listened to another Star Trek podcast where the host talks about, but you're my favorite. You're my favorite by far. The host talks about how, you know, you always have like your Star Trek, even though like my Star Trek is Next Generation, even though I think Deep Space Nine is probably as a whole better at telling a story, but I like my Star Trek's the Next Generation. It's the Enterprise D, it's Captain Picard and Riker and Geordi, you know, the whole gang's here.
Right.
And so I started watching Next Generation in reruns. It was on every weeknight, Monday through Friday, 7:00 p.m. on Channel 13, KCOP here in Los Angeles. And I would just eat them up. I would just watch reruns. And I think it was I don't know. I have no idea which the first episode I watched was probably from season 3 or 4, because they were showing like the most recent reruns. But it's kind of like you, Mike. You watch Star Trek with people on TV. I don't even know how you watch that, but I just always see you tweeting about it. And I don't know what channel this is that you're watching Star Trek on, so I can watch it.
Oh yeah, the All Star Trek blog on H&I. Yeah, that's fun.
I don't even know what that is. I'll try to. Can I watch it on the internet, or is it only like? Do I need an actual antenna?
I think it's just on the old fashioned broadcaster cable television.
All right, we'll work on finding that. But so they would just show 5 episodes a week, and they would show them in sequential order. So, you know, if season 5 was currently airing, it'd run up to the end of season 4, and then it would just restart with Encounter at Farpoint. And so every weeknight I was watching Star Trek, and I didn't have a lot of friends at school. And I've said this many times. So like my friends were Captain Picard and Commander Riker and Lieutenant Commander Data, because I didn't have friends at school. So I would come home every night, you know, not wanting to go back to school the next day, but I could be transported off to this other world where differences didn't matter. Everyone was you know, unless you're Barclay, you know, but, like, right. We all want to be Picard, but we're all basically Barclay. That's really what it comes down to. So that's really what it was. So I needed an escape, and it provided an escape for me. And then, you know, I had a lot of other nerdy friends. So one of my friends had all the original Crew movies on VHS. So we started watching those, and that's really my biggest, point of contact with the original series is those movies. I haven't even watched every episode of the original series. Again, I'll duck the rocks and try to apologize for my downfall on that.
It's all right.
Yeah. And so is really the Next Generation. I remember, a big thing. I don't know if you guys have talked about this, but the customizable card game.
Yes. Tim is a big fan of that game.
Oh my goodness. So that So that came out like probably 1996,
94, I think.
94. Yeah. So I started playing
maybe
Magic.
96. Might have been 96.
I started playing Magic, which I think was the first one, and then they're like, it's like Star Trek. It's like Magic, but for Star Trek. And so any money I had as a junior hire, I was buying boxes and boxes of Star Trek card game cards.
Wow.
So that, super passionate about Star Trek in that way. So yeah, so it just became this place of comfort for me. And I think that really like shaping my faith, like I don't know if it shaped my faith that much as a kid, if I'm being honest. It was just something that was entertaining and comforting for me. But I find that honestly, like listening to your guys' podcast helps me kind of frame Star Trek a little more towards my faith, because I think you guys, you think so deeply about it and have such wonderful insights that so your insights on Star Trek help shape my faith. But I think a lot of it has been recently just with Discovery and just kind of the diversity and the inclusion that we see in Discovery is really shaping for my faith and kind of in representation. Like growing up in evangelical circles, like I don't know any transgendered people like at all. But to see Gray,
Ian Alexander,
yeah, I think I saw him in Pasadena last weekend.
Really?
He had a mask on, but like he totally had his haircut. And I looked up, like, does Ian Alexander live in Pasadena? And I couldn't find out, but it said that he was 5'1" and he was short. So I'm like, that was probably him. And like I went on his Twitch stream yesterday, and I wanted to be like, were you in Pasadena on Saturday? But I didn't want to feel like a creeper, so I didn't do it. Right. So like I don't know any transgender people. So to see representation of Ian Alexander, non-binary people, Blue Del Barrio, like these are all issues that, if I'm going to be honest, I'm still wrestling with in what they mean for me and what they mean for ministry in my life. But just to have that level of representation, and then obviously going back to the original series with having, as a Japanese American, having Sulu, having George Takei on the bridge, like my family wasn't interned because they were in Hawaii and there's too many Japanese people to intern in Hawaii. But if they'd been in California, like they would have been like my grandparents would have been interned. So like to know like that's part of George Takei's story. So to see him on the bridge of the Enterprise and Uhura, and obviously the first interracial kiss, like, so like that's probably been the biggest thing recently, is just raising my eyes of kind of what representation means and and how much it matters. And so as I wrestling all those personally, Star Trek is helping me, I don't know, like shape it and form it, at least have a counterbalance to, my evangelical upbringing.
Yeah. Well, that's really an interesting thing. And I think Star Trek does that a lot at its best. It puts us in conversation with and in contact with things that we might only know as abstractions, if we're aware of them at all.
Absolutely.
Right? But by doing it narratively, by doing it through character and story, we're able to see things. And a lot of times it's coded in Star Trek, and so, because a lot of it, because it had to be in the earliest days, right? Because you couldn't go out and make a TV show that was against the Vietnam War and get it past the censors, but you could, as Gene would like to say, talk about purple people, on another planet, and and you could tell a story that was analogous, and that people with, again, as we said, with eyes to see and ears to hear, would see and read those things.
Yeah, I remember even being a child, like not a child, but a teenager, and I just watching The Outcast, right? The episode of Next Generation, where it's a non-binary society, but there's a character who feels that she has a female gender identity. When did that come out? 1992. So I was like an 11 or 12-year-old. I'm watching this. I'm like, I think this means something more than I think it means, right? So not really being able to like put a finger on it. Like this means more. So exactly what you're saying, Kevin, of just kind of like trying to get it past there, saying it without actually saying it. But it's like, so I think Star Trek's always done that for me.
Yeah, and I think that's really valuable and important. And I think particularly, you and I come from the same sort of context. I have a strong Baptist background, and so coming from that context where there are a lot of things that you don't encounter. Yeah. And there are a lot of things that you, again, know only as abstractions, especially dealing with varieties of people, because we tend to kind of all be, pretty similar to one another in those evangelical circles in a lot of ways, and even in some contexts, you might only primarily be with other people who are of your same gender, even. And so having that, I think that's really important from that context, and really from any Christian context, from any context, period. But since we're speaking as Christians, from any Christian context, I think it's very important to have that and to experience that, and to allow those tough questions that are explored in Star Trek about what we do when we encounter another civilization.
Exactly.
What is actual charity, and what is stuff that just makes us feel good that's actually going to hurt the people we're trying to help? All that sort of thing. What are the repercussions and the ramifications of our actions? I think Deep Space Nine does that really well. Talking about the long-lasting impact of our choices. I think that's very helpful and very important for us to go through that and allow ourselves to be challenged by those things.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned The Outcast as one episode that stood out for you. What are some other TNG episodes that are particularly meaningful, or that you just particularly enjoy a lot, or remember especially well, or find yourself coming back to again and again for some reason?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so you guys are doing but you're kind of like going through, you did a lot of first season episodes in your 35th anniversary. I'm like, are they going to talk about Code of Honor? Cause that episode's trash. Are they going to do Haven? Cause Haven's okay. No, Justice is the horrible one. Oh my gosh. And like,
we're not going episode by episode.
I'm grateful for that, because Justice is so bad. Like, I don't know how Star Trek survived its first season. The Next Generation survived its first season, because it's just not great. I mean, like,
but it was new Star Trek.
You
remember how it was.
That's true. I was watching Enterprise. I'm like, okay, I guess maybe in 1987 this is how people felt. But so there's bad episodes. You can talk about Justice, or the time Beverly fell in love with a green candle ghost. Like, there's weird ones out there. One of my favorite episodes. I love The Perfect Mate. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I didn't get a girlfriend until I was 22. And so just the idea of like Famke Janssen falling in love with me just seemed like the greatest thing in the world. Like, Jean Grey wants to be my wife. Like, that's amazing. So I love The Perfect Mate. I just think it's a great episode. I think we see a different side of Captain Picard in that is great. Another, obviously, I think The Inner Light is spectacular. I know now there's issues of should the probe really have done that? Is it fair to like have Jean-Luc, there are questions that you could raise about that, but as a television episode, it's so good. Just him leaving this whole life. And I love Tapestry. I hope when you guys are kind of doing the series on Q, you get to Tapestry, because
we'll get there.
That is a phenomenal episode of Star Trek. I love Tapestry, and a lot of those are Jean-Luc centric, because I think he has the best episodes. But I really like, just as a rant, I love Power Play, when Riker and Data and O'Brien get possessed by the little aliens. And they're saying they're the disembodied spirits of a Federation crew. I love Power Play for some reason. Disaster. A lot of like kind of the ship in the bottle episodes I really, really enjoy. I mean, I could keep going on. What are some of your guys' favorite episodes? Like, this is a Star Trek podcast. Let's talk about Star Trek: The Next Generation, what we love. Like, I could go on for hours. What about this one? Oh yeah, what about this one? What about this one?
You said you think Jean-Luc gets the best episodes. Is he your favorite character, if you had to pick a favorite? Or
man, probably. I mean, especially with the addition of Star Trek Picard, which comes back next week or this week when it gets released. Very excited about that. Yep. I convinced my wife to watch that with me. So she hasn't watched a lot of Star Trek with me, but she watched Picard with me, and she enjoyed it.
What'd she think?
She really enjoyed it. She thought it was it was good. So I'm excited about that. So I like them all, right? I think Data obviously has a tremendous arc. I've grown to love Commander Riker. I didn't like him very much when I was first watching the Next Generation. Really? Yeah, because growing up I didn't like Kirk that much, and so I thought that Riker was just too much like Kirk. Yeah. But I've grown to appreciate Captain James Tiberius Kirk in my older age. And I really like Worf. I just think, especially in First Contact,
he's such a bad, you know what, like in First Contact, just like stabbing Borg with his batleth and his little knife. Like Worf is just awesome in First Contact.
He is.
And like they play the Klingon theme from the motion picture when he shows up. Like just like Worf like owns First Contact. Like he's just so great in that movie.
Yeah, he is pretty great. That is a great Worf movie. That I will agree with you there. It's a whole lot better than, him getting
Insurrection.
I was about to say
getting the pimple and
getting a giant pimple on his face and stuff. It's just like,
like I've given Insurrection a lot of crap over the years because it deserves it, because it's not very good. And I know you talk about how you really enjoy the Enterprise D, but man, that Sovereign class starship is so clean looking.
Yeah,
we get a lot of it in Insurrection. And I know it's ridiculous that there's a joystick that Riker uses to pilot the Enterprise E out of the Briar Patch, but it really looks good doing it. So
the laughter in my theater when that scene happened. It was painful.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Or what episodes do you go back to?
I do come back to Best of Both Worlds an awful
so
lot.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and I've shown it to my daughter, and she enjoys that one a lot with me, and we've even listened to the soundtrack from it in the car, on the CD release. And I actually have even come to appreciate part 2 a little more than part 1 over the years.
I think I obviously like pinnacle of Star Trek, right? And just such great television. And then I just love it. Then, like I said, I didn't like Riker that much growing up. Those are Riker episodes.
They are,
which is
absolutely
what I have to remind myself. That's right. Like, because you think it's about Locutus, it's about Jean-Luc, it's about Riker, it's about Shelby challenging his authority. Why doesn't he want to be a captain? Like all these tremendous.
It's vocational struggle right there on the screen.
It's so great. And then it's like, oh, that's right. It's totally a Riker episode that Commander Riker gets probably the best episode of Star Trek Next Generation, which is pretty spectacular. What about you, Kevin? Sorry, I've gone into host mode. My bad.
No, it's okay. Shoot, I don't even know. I mean, I usually I have a hard time even picking a favorite series or a favorite movie. But usually with Star Trek, with Next Generation, it's usually whatever episode I have seen most recently of the ones that I love. Whether it's like Attached or well, like you said, I mean, they're the ones that people go to, The Inner Light and Measure of a Man and all those. But, I love Where No One Has Gone Before. We had a great episode, on that one.
It was a great conversation.
And, I love anything with Q, and I love anything that develops the characters. That's one reason I really like Attached, because it really develops Jean-Luc and Beverly's relationship. Anything where those two interact just makes me happy. Whatever they're doing, I love seeing those two characters together. I love all the great Worf episodes like Birthright and Rightful Heir. I mean, there's so many good things in Star Trek. So it's really impossible to say what my favorite episode is. I really can't think of one that is like it stands out above all the others as one I go back to all the time.
Yeah, but, it's just like, for me, it's an old metaphor, but it's like a comfortable pair of shoes, right? I just slip it on and like just even the hum of the engines, right? As you watch it, it's televised, comfort food for me. Which
you can find like 10-hour loops of online.
I know.
YouTube
that's right.
The next time in my head and I can't fall asleep, I'm just going to have Siri play that and then
there you go.
Fall asleep peacefully.
Well, what's an episode of Next Generation? Since we are in our Next Generation series, what is an episode of Next Generation, or even a Next Generation movie, that gave you that moment of, or maybe that you've talked about on the podcast or on your blog or something, that gave you that moment of engaging your faith life with your Star Trek nerddom?
So randomly, right, I was talking about this, I think, recently on a show, but just the idea of kind of like growing and changing and the fact that God wants us to grow and develop. And so I think Data's Day is kind of a really good example of that. Of Data, just, right, like that's why we love Data. And, Riker calls him Pinocchio, and just his striving to be more than himself. And so, right, in Data's Day, like he's doing all these things, like he's planning a wedding, like there's all these crazy, this dancing. It's just, he's trying so hard to be more than his programming. And I think, you know, that's what I kind of like when I look at my life of following Jesus. Like, I'm trying to be more than just my humanity. I'm trying to bear the image of God. And so it's really, really striving for that. I think Data is a great example of that. There's, you know, that's all throughout Next Generation. So in Silicon Avatar, a lady shows up on the Enterprise and she's doing everything she can to destroy the crystalline entity because she's so full of rage and anger. And that's a theme that's revisited a lot throughout Next Generation, but just kind of seeing kind of like what anger and vengeance can do. And then even in that episode, right, they're figuring out a way to communicate with the crystalline entity, this thing that has demolished entire planets and civilizations. They're like, oh, maybe we just don't understand it. Maybe there's a way to communicate with it. And then the lady blows it up. So I think just always trying to seek, even if there's anger on my part for somebody, even if there's distress, or even if I don't like somebody, is there some common ground we can find, some way to communicate? And I love that Star Trek always tries to push us towards that, right? I think instead of like the first option isn't picking up a phaser, right? The first option is trying to have a conversation. I mean, and then poor Mr. Worf just gets told to shut up all the time because all he wants to do is pick up a phaser. But just the encouragement, right? That in a TV series, we're told that it's better to seek understanding. It's better to try to communicate. And well, clearly that's right. And then having that drilled in my head 5 times a week from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock PM, that shapes us, right? This thing that I invited into my life for so long has absolutely shaped me. Obviously, I played a lot of Star Trek, the customizable card game, but I value communication. I value seeking to understand infinite diversity, infinite combinations. Like, those are things that I value, hopefully in part because of the way that Jesus has been working my life. But I can't deny that Star Trek has shaped me in that way.
Right. Well, I would say that it seems clear to me that Star Trek is one of those things that, you know, through which God works. You know,
Absolutely.
I'm like, you know, it's not that when we, you know, find our nerdy things, we find Jesus in our nerdy stuff. It's not because we're trying to squish him in there. It's because, you know, we see that God is already at work in these things, you know.
We're revealing something that's already there.
Yeah.
Or it's being revealed to us. It's a revelation.
Right, exactly. That's the thing. I mean, and I hope people who listen to this show and listen to your show understand that we're just finding this stuff. We don't go looking for it. It just kind of comes up and says hi to us, and we share it. And you know, because I think it's in there. And you know, you're talking about things with these episodes that you like, you know, that could be beneficial to anybody, you know, that will make us better human beings, you know, because sometimes we talk about, you know, being a better Christian and being a better human as though those are separate things, and they're not. You know, it had better be the same thing, or there's something wrong with our gospel.
Right.
And so, I think anything that encourages us to be more loving toward other people. And I really like that you brought up Data's Day. I would say, you know, we talked about favorite episodes, and I think actually maybe the most quoted piece of Star Trek, or one of the most quoted pieces of Star Trek, is what Data says at the end of Data's Day for me. I've said that a lot, where he says, he says, if being human is more than simply a matter of being born flesh and blood, if it is instead a way of acting, thinking, and feeling, then I'm hopeful that I will one day discover my own humanity. Until then, I will continue learning, changing, growing, and trying to become more than what I am. And that's really, I think, great, because in that scene, it's Data not even realizing that he's already involved in the project of being human. And I think that is sort of the human project. And in fact, I've taught that in college classes, and, you know, written that on the whiteboard, and had a student raise his head and said, "That sounds like Gene Roddenberry." And I'm like, yeah, well, there's a reason for that. You know, like, you found me out, you know. It's Ron Moore, but it is, you know, within the Roddenberry and Star Trek context. But yeah, I think that bit of dialogue is one of those ones that I've circled back to over and over and over again. And I do that, you know, those little bits of wisdom, those little beautiful moments in Star Trek of true things that are said, you know, beautiful things that are said, good things
Absolutely.
that are said. But I hang on to those and keep them in my pocket. And I think, you know, that's very much if we do it right, I think that's very much how we can encounter scripture in a healthy way, because it's really easy to think, well, I've got to read through the Bible in a year, or I've got to, memorize all these verses or all that sort of thing. And no, the really good thing to do is to find what speaks to you as you read it, as you hear it, as you talk about it. Find what speaks to you and take those things, put them in your pocket, hold on to them. Because like you said, the stories that we engage with, the things that we tell ourselves, the phrases and the ideas that we repeat in our heads over and over throughout the day, they shape us. And they're going to shape us one way or the other. So we might as well be thoughtful about how we engage them, and thoughtful about how we let them shape us, and do those things on purpose, rather than just passively allowing it to be done to us without our realizing it. So that's one of the most important things we can realize.
Absolutely. And just, you talk about all truth is God's truth, all beauty is God's beauty, and that we don't have to shy away from truth when we find it. Like, if it's true, it's true. If it's God's truth, it's God's truth. If I find it in the lectionary, which is probably a lot easier to do, that's great. If I find it in a random episode of Star Trek Next Generation, that's like, even Justice, which I was, saying was horrible, because it is. But right, like the people don't wear many clothes, like, they're super angry and they're worried about their angry God judging them, and like, it's a weird metaphasic alien or some Jeffrey's tube, all the jargon that gets thrown about. Like that, there's truth in there. Like, oh, like, those people are really scared of their fake God who's just full of anger and demands justice. Like, well, we serve a God who, had justice brought in the Son of Jesus Christ. Like,
it's a great moment at the end of that episode, because Jean-Luc says, "I say to you, whoever's listening, that there can be no justice so long as laws are absolute." Mm-hmm. And what he's really saying there is a Christian truth. It's a Jewish truth. It's a Talmudic tradition. It's that there is no such thing as justice without mercy.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And learning that and understanding that mercy and justice, I mean, they're part of the same project.
Absolutely.
That's very important.
And so, if we can find that in one of the worst episodes of Next Generation, think what we can find in one of the good ones.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I found good stuff in the first Gospel According to Star Trek book. I found good stuff in Star Trek Into Darkness, my least favorite Star Trek film of all time.
I know. Every time you say, you were talking about the Kelvin crew getting to make a fourth movie. It's like they got to make 3 movies and 2 good ones. And I'm happy to let people enjoy or not enjoy what they like, but sure. I feel like I gotta stand up a little bit for I feel the need to stand up for Star Trek Into Darkness every time you talk about how you don't like it. And I'm totally fine with you not liking it, but I think it's better than you I think it's got more heart than you give it credit for.
All right. Well,
personally.
Good.
I think that as I was watching it, right? So you have Peter Weller's character who wants Starfleet to be this horrible thing that's just tearing people down, and Kirk is fighting for something else. And in my head, Star Trek is trying to tell something larger than itself. I think that was Star Trek communicating about itself, right? That Star Trek is tending to be this large, big sci-fi blockbuster thing, but ultimately Kirk is fighting for the truth of Star Trek, that it's about stories, it's about connection, it's about what we're seeing now with Discovery and Prodigy and somehow even Lower Decks, which is crazy. So in this giant blockbuster, I think it was saying we're still fighting for the heart of Star Trek here, with Peter Weller being make big boisterous Star Trek, and Captain Kirk saying let's fight for something a little bit better, a little more true to Starfleet and Gene Roddenberry's vision.
And I thought I was meta.
So that is the grace that I extend to Star Trek Into Darkness. It doesn't cover Khan. It doesn't cover that whole side of things.
Right.
But at least it helps me sleep at night between at least Kirk and RoboCop. It helps me sleep.
That's good.
So Scott, do you have any specific goals or projects for the Christian nerd in mind in the near future? Beyond what it is now, which is great. I don't mean you should be disappointed with what it is.
Thanks,
now.
Mike. When are you gonna make the Christian nerd better, Scott? Huh? When's that coming?
What's next for the Christian nerd is what I really want to ask.
I thought there'd be a little more grace and acceptance on this show.
What can we look forward to from the Christian Nerd?
I don't know. There's some other ideas and thoughts that I have that I'm working on in just my life. But I think the Christian Nerd is going to continue to be I've got no plans to shut it down. I don't have like dreams of making it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I've got no dreams of making this bigger. I think I recently was able to record my 500th episode, which is
congratulations.
Pretty spectacular, right? I think back to when I was first talking to my wife about starting a podcast, and I was going to be recording in person with my co-host Ron. I was like, hey, I want to invest $400 in this recorder so we can do this podcast and do it well. And she's like, is it something that you're going to give up on in 6 months? Because if you are, then you can't spend that much money on something. I was like, well, I've been doing this blog for 5.5 years. And so I think I can be committed to it, not knowing back then that I would actually be committed to it for 500 episodes. So I think that what I really want to see continue happening in what does happen is, I talk about in every show, there's a Slack group for the Christian Nerd. It's called the Octagon. It's an actual community of people that I've met some of them in real life. A lot of them I haven't, but I also know how to pray for them every single day because they share. One of the guys who listens, great listener, great friend, have not met him in real life. He was saying that like he's got a church family and he's got friends, but he said that like our Slack group is like his group, like it's his core group of people. Like he's like, you guys know things about me that the people I work with don't know about. And so just I want to continue to cultivate a community, and I know a lot of content creators say that, I want to cultivate community. I want to cultivate community. Like I do. Like, I just want to continue having friends. We are thinking about doing an actual meetup in person this summer. So that would be something on the horizon. Hopefully we can all travel and, COVID's dumb and stuff. But so for the Christian Nerd,
great.
I want to keep encouraging people, meeting people. For somebody who claims to be as introverted as I am, I seem to keep gathering more and more friends, which is a great thing because they're friends for the right reasons. They're friends for we have these things in common and we want to encourage each other. We want to pray for each other. We want to be present for each other through all the good times. It sometimes gives me whiplash, right? Where in our Slack group, we're having this serious conversation about like something like serious things that are happening in somebody's life. And they're like, did you see the new trailer for Doctor Strange? Like, oh yeah, like that's awesome too, right? So it's just all this flipping back and forth. But again, that's what life is, right? Like we can't I'm really like, I'm heartbroken over what's happening in Ukraine right now. But I'm also really excited about Star Trek Picard. Like those two realities can exist in my life as long as I'm not saying Star Trek Picard is more important than innocent people losing their lives, right? Like, don't lose perspective, but I can be excited about something while also being heartbroken about something. That's just how life is. Like, that's how we need to live life. We can't just deny one part of ourselves. Like, I'm just gonna be happy all the time. Oh, they're gonna be sad all the time. Like that's not who God created us to be.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, I'm glad you've shown such commitment to the Christian Nerd, and I don't know how I first discovered it when it was a blog, but I was always so impressed with your commitment to it, and I wanted to thank you also for being a committed commenter when I was blogging for the Sci-Fi Christian back around 2011.
Yeah, those guys have been around for a really long time. Like as long as I have. Like they're an episode like 2 million. Like those dudes.
They're pretty far up there.
Nothing else.
Yeah, but when I was blogging for them, I could always count on you to comment, and I appreciated being in dialogue with you there. And I'm happy to have the conversation continue here now.
Oh no, like I said, like this feels like one of the most full circle things in internet life, right? That all of us somehow came together 10 years ago, blogging, and now here we are all podcasting, and whatever in the next 10 years will be like video conferencing live to Venus. Who knows what it is, but it'll be great.
That's awesome. Well, it's been great to have you here. And like you said, it is pretty full circle. It does go right back to the beginning for all of us. And it's just cool to get to have the conversation. Where can our listeners find you and catch up with what you're doing?
If you just go to thechristiannerd.com, that's kind of the best place. Or I love Twitter. Just go to @SCOTTHIGA. Find me on Twitter. That's the best place to interact with me. So those, christiannerd.com or on Twitter, best places to find me and find my stuff.
Cool. That's awesome. Scott, thank you so much for being with us, and, keep doing what you're doing, and we'll keep supporting you from over here. But,
thank you so much. Like I anytime anybody asks me to be on their show, I'm like, why? Because
this was a no-brainer.
Because I know
me. No-brainer.
You guys don't know me, but I know me. Like, why would anyone want to talk to me? But when it was two people that I respect as much as I respect you two, and appreciate the work that you do, and have known you guys as long as I have, I was over the moon for the invite.
Thanks, Scott. Live long and prosper. Well, that was a great conversation. Our thanks again to Scott Higa from The Christian Nerd for dropping by. And Mike, what do we got coming up next episode?
So, again, no title released just yet, but we will be talking about the next episode of Star Trek Discovery, which is Season 4, Episode 11.
And you know, what better title could you ask for than Episode 11? I mean, come on.
I know, it's evocative. It's lyrical. It's romantic. It's inspiring. It's everything Star Trek aspires to be. Episode 11.
Episode 11. Wonderful. I think we've reached, I thought we reached a pinnacle with the butcher's knife cares not for the lamb's cry, but no, episode 11. Anyway. All right. Well, that's still nonetheless, that's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to it. I hope all of you will join us as well. In the meantime, please like, comment, and share. And if you like what you're hearing, please write a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. Your reviews help more people find out about the show and let us know how we're doing.
Also, send us your feedback. You can find us at Gospel Trek Pod on both Twitter and Instagram, and The Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook. Or send us an email, gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. However you reach us, we'd love to include your feedback in the show.
And you can, of course, support the show also by subscribing. You'll get early access to each week's topical episode, plus outtakes and bonus content. Just click the subscribe button wherever you listen. And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time,
I'm Mike Poteet.
And I'm Kevin Sinise. And as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.